Oh. Hey, boy.
Who's that? Easy? Oh,
It could be no easy.
good boy.
So big,
Good boy.
huge.
Feel weak. Come on there. Come on. Good boy. Good boy. Who's your good boy? Who's your good boy?
You can lick all you want, as long
Good
as
job.
you don't nibble.
Good job. That's better than you did all morning.
Yeah, I'm smarter than you. I'm not gonna make you like me. Or accidentally nip me and drop that.
Hey, boy. Oh,
Don't say.
Maybe you need to count your fingers.
Oh, God.
Hey, comic lovers, EMoney and the old man back with you again. And Harry, look who's back. Look who's back. Yeah. Thor the Dog of Thunder. He is back. Yes, you are. Yes,
Sure,
you
this
are.
is the same dog. He's huge.
Here you go, boy. There you go. Oh, you're such a good
He's
boy.
put on like 20 pounds. And if anything, he's hungrier.
Yep.
Hey, it's all good. All good.
All right, so we're so glad to have Thor back here. He just looks at the treats. Yeah, you just sees the treats, don't you? All right, comic lovers. Today, in addition to Thor being back, we are talking about the history of comic books, the Silver Age Part 2. We had so much to cover in the Silver Age, we had to do it in 2 parts. There you go, boy.
Also, I wanted to do it in 2 parts.
Okay. So we're going to be doing that, and then later we're going to be back here in the garage for Stump the Old Man with Thor again, because we just missed Thor so much, didn't we? Yes, we did. All right, cuddle up with your pets, kids, because Thor's back. This is Back Issues. All right, we'll check back in with Thor in just a little bit. Before we get started today, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on your notifications, give us a thumbs up, and if you like, leave us a comment. All right, so we're into the Silver Age Part 2. Now, last week, Silver Age Part 1, we did 56 to 61 mostly. This week, it's going to be mostly covering the time between 1961 and 1969. So, still in the Silver Age. So, old man, why don't you take it away?
I will gladly take it away and run with it.
All right.
I'm not going to run, no. But let's start with how the old man became a comic book collector. By the time the 60s rolled around, my dad, who had worked at the Courier Journal, a newspaper in Louisville, Kentucky, he'd worked there since got out of the war, World War II. And at this time, he's getting 3 or 4 weeks vacation a year. And first day of his vacation, because he would take them all together.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't spread them out over the year like I used to do. He'd, bam, big old block of time off. So we'd all, first day of vacation, I'll hop in his Buick, off we'd go. In fact, in 1964, we went from Louisville to Texas, dipped down to Mexico long enough to say we were there, then went straight to Los Angeles and did the Disneyland thing.
Mm-hmm.
Drove straight north to Seattle, and we were at the 1964 Seattle World's Fair. From there, we drove north a little bit more into Canada, went due east. Did you know that Canada had a lot of castles?
I did not know that.
I didn't either, but I've been to some of them. So anyway, went straight across Canada until we got to Niagara Falls in New York, and then dropped straight down to Louisville, Kentucky, and home. Now, that's a lot of time for a young guy to be sitting in a car. So to keep me entertained, my mom would give me a comic book that she had bought before we left on the trip. She'd give me a comic book every 100 miles. And you want to talk about a kid looking over his dad's shoulder, how much further? How much further? So on one of those trips, and I don't know if it was a 1964 trip or what, my mom gave me a copy of Avengers #1. And I want you to know that is probably my favorite all-time comic. And I guarantee you I've read that comic more times than any other single comic book that I've ever owned. So I had to find out what happened to these characters that they introduced in this issue, because I hadn't picked up, like some of the earlier issues where they introduced these guys. For me, this was a starting point. Now, unfortunately, I was a kid, didn't have no jobby job, and getting comic books for myself was out of the question. There was no way I could do it at that age. So I was at the mercy of somebody else getting me comic books. So the next issue of the Avengers I got was number 8.
Oh.
Yep. This is the first appearance of the time traveler Kang, who I hear is going to show up in the MCU soon. But meanwhile, I discovered other guys like the Fantastic Four and the Amazing Spider-Man. Now, keep in mind there weren't any LCSs back then, no local comic book shops. But my mom helped out. Every once in a while, she would help me place an order with Robert Bell. He was a dealer up in New York, Halpage, New York, I think. And he advertised in the comic books and some of the little advertisement spaces they used to have back then. So you can imagine the excitement of getting a package from New York and ripping in there, because you never were sure of your want list what he actually was able to get you. So that was exciting. So, like many comic book fans back in the Silver Age, I became a collector, mostly due to the character development in Marvel Comics. I like DC Comics, but like I've said before, if you missed a few issues of Batman or Superman, it didn't matter. I mean, nothing really changed that much. DC's editor wasn't like Stan Lee. They weren't constantly reminding you of what issue something important happened, so you could go try and find that issue. So in that, Stan was brilliant. So we're supposed to be talking about the history of comic books, not the history of this old man. So as I have said before, it's time to get into something fantastic and amazing.
All right.
All right. So Martin Goodman, I think I've mentioned his name before, he was the publisher for Timely Comics, Atlas Comics, and then Marvel Comics. He had used the Marvel name back when it was Timely. He put Marvel on a few of the covers. I guess he just wanted to see how it would go. Didn't work out so much, so he dropped it. So switching to Marvel wasn't actually something brand new. So Goodman, he had a track record of watching what was on TV and checking out other comic book companies and seeing what they were having success with. And he was pretty much known as a trend follower, not a trend setter. Now what I'm leading to there is he saw how DC was doing with the Justice League, and he went to Stan, his editor, and said, hey, we need a team that's going to rival the Justice League of America. Now, this goes back to a time where Stan wasn't happy being a comic book editor. I mean, most people considered comic books a lower art form. Stan resented that. And he was thinking about just washing his hands of it. So he decided, hey, if I'm going out, I'm going to do something I can be proud of, even if nobody else likes it. And so there was an interview a few years later, and somebody asked him about creating a Fantastic Four, and Stan said, for just this once, I would do the type of story I myself would enjoy reading. And the characters would be the kind of characters I could personally relate to. They'd be flesh and blood. They'd have their faults and their foibles. They'd be fallible and feisty, and most important of all, inside their colorful costume booties, they still have feet of clay. So, Stan came up with a basic idea, and he went to Jack the King Kirby with an outline of what he wanted. And Kirby like what he had done on Challenge of the Unknown when he was working for DC years ago. So he took those guys, expanded on it, changed it around, and he drew the entire first issue from the outline that Stan gave him. And then Stan added the word balloons and the captions after it was already drawn. This method of doing comic books became known as the Marvel method.
All right.
And the creative teams at Marvel, for the most part, adapted to using that system for years. In fact, I believe some of the guys still use it today. So, but Fantastic Four is another example of who created who. And I've found many arguments to support that the FF was created by Stan or that they were created by Jack. But to me, this is a case of, because of the way they did that comic, neither guy would have been successful with that comic book without the other guy. So, in my humble opinion, the Fantastic Four was created by both Stan the Man Lee and Jack the King Kirby. Enough said. All right. So, first issue of Fantastic Four came out in late 1961. Then in early 1962, in Tales to Astonish number 27, which is one of those comics that featured the monsters and the sci-fi stories that Kirby, Ditko, Stan, and a guy named Don Heck had been doing for years. But one of the stories in number 27 was The Man in the Anthill. And it was the first appearance of Henry Pym, who would later become Ant-Man. Now, he didn't become Ant-Man in this story, in fact. He was just a scientist who invented this formula. Then he realized how dangerous it was, and I think at the end of the story, he destroyed the formula.
Mm.
It didn't stay destroyed. All right, so mid-1962, out comes the Hulk. It's another Lee and Kirby creation. And in the first issue, he was gray. But he was green in issue 2 and on. Now, there's a couple of different stories about why the change in color. In reality, it was probably because the colorist, a guy named Stan Goldberg, had a hard time being consistent with all the different shades of gray. But I personally like the version I've told for many years, and that same colorist, Stan Goldberg, misread the word gray on the rough drawings and changed it to green, and history was made.
Ah.
It's a better story. But anyway, another little bit of Hulk trivia is that in issue number 2 also, Ditko, Steve Ditko, Spider-Man guy, inked over Kirby's pencils. You really need to take a look at that. I mean, to this day, that's my favorite drawings of the Hulk, except for when Jim Steranko drew him many years later.
All right.
All right. A few months after that, Fantastic Four has been putting out a couple issues, and it's Fantastic Four number 5. We get Latveria's own Dr. Doom. Not Broom, not the guy that we talked about previously, but Dr. Doom's first appearance. Lee and Kirby wanted a soul-shaking character with a lot of depth in his personality. Now, the information I found was that the character had to be a little rushed to meet a publication deadline. So the first appearance didn't flesh out his origin. We don't get Dr. Doom's origin until a couple of years later in Fantastic Four Annual number 2. Now, a month after that, Amazing Fantasy number 15 hits the stand. Now, if any of you out there don't know why that issue was important, then you're new to comic books. You know why.
I do. Yeah.
I figured. This is the first appearance of the Web Slinger, the Amazing Spider-Man. Now, we talked about the creation of this character in length in our first episode of Back Issues. Now, you're going to put a link?
Yeah.
EMoney will put a link down there somewhere. He does that stuff. I don't know anything about it. Now, this character was different. He had serious troubles. Hell, he started out doing gigs for cash to help out his Aunt May. I don't remember what issue of The Amazing Spider-Man was the first one I actually read, but I remember being hooked from the get-go. Read that one, set it down, wanted more. All right, now the same month in mid-1962, Journey into Mystery number 83 shows up. Now, this has been one of those same Ditko Kirby sci-fi monster comics, and Stan wanted a new hero, something different. Now, years ago, he had edited a story in 2 issues of Venus back in 1951 when Marvel was still called Atlas Comics with a Thor character. Now, I've never heard of Venus. Never heard of it. But Stan said, how do you make someone stronger than the strongest person? It finally came to me. Don't make him human. Make him a god. I decided readers were already pretty familiar with the Greek and Roman gods. Hey, it might be fun to delve into the old Norse legends. Besides, I pictured Norse gods looking like Vikings of old with the flowing beards, the horned helmets, and the battle clubs. And Journey to Mystery needed a shot in the arm. So I picked Thor to headline the book. After writing an outline depicting the story and the characters I had in mind, I asked my brother Larry to write the script because I didn't have time. It was only natural for me to assign the penciling to Jack Kirby. Larry Lieber was Stan's younger brother. He worked at Marvel.
Okay.
Which, another tidbit I didn't know until recently. Now, Kirby had done a Thor story himself for DC Comics in Tales of the Unexpected number 16. And when you look at the cover, it doesn't say anything about Thor. Another science fiction book that just one of the stories in it was a Thor story. So Kirby was already knowledgeable of some of the Norse mythology like Odin and Loki. And it was really easy for Kirby to just expand on the character. And Thor became a hit in Journey to Mystery and ran from issue 83 until 125 when the title changed to Thor in issue 126. Now at this point, I think Stan started to sense he had something going on. He was on a roll. And he remembered the Ant Guy character from earlier in 62 in an issue of Tales to Astonish that I just talked about. Using the Marvel method as usual, he came up with a basic plot for the character, turned the idea over to the King, and let Kirby and Larry Lieber flesh it out. And Ant-Man was born in Tales to Astonish number 35. All right. Let's step away from Marvel for a few minutes, but don't worry. We'll be right back.
All right.
Somehow, and I didn't delve into checking out why or how, but Gold Key split off from Delta Comics in 1962 and started publishing their own stuff. Their first superhero comic was Dr. Solar, Man of the Atom number 1. And it was pretty popular for a non-DC or Marvel superhero comic. Now the reason might have been, and I've looked at those first few covers, they were painted covers and they looked really good. So I could see somebody saying, "Woo, I got to have that." Now, since Goki was a spinoff of Dell, they didn't have to use the Comics Code approval stamp.
No.
Which Goki could have taken advantage of that and made their stuff just a little bit edgy. Mm-hmm. But no, they stayed pretty much right along the lines of all the superhero comics of that era. But by not having to submit their stuff to the Comics Code Authority, they probably were able to get their comic books out a little faster.
Sure.
Good for them. Now, Goki followed up Solar a few months later in early 1963 with one of my favorites, Magnus Robot Fighter 4000 AD. It was written and drawn by Russ Manning. I think he had gotten a name doing newspaper strips. But in this Magnus Robot Fighter story, humans have come entirely dependent upon robots. The United States has become one giant city called North Am. The main character, Magnus, he's an orphan. And he's taken and raised by a rogue robot, and he's trained to fight and destroy other robots. And so, of course, Magnus Robot Fighter, we know what he does and why he fights robots. But every time he destroys a robot, a lot of times it's with a ridge hand to the neck.
Right.
And you would get this sound effect, squeak! My favorite sound effect in all of comics. But at any rate, that was fun. But let's get back to Marvel.
Okay.
It's early 1963. Stan has been successful with everything he's done since Fantastic Four #1. Now, personally, I think he got a little ballsy. Mm-hmm. And listen to this quote from Stan. "I think I gave myself a dare. It was the height of the Cold War. The readers, the young readers, if there was one thing they hated, it was war. It was the military. So I got a hero who represented that to the 100th degree. He was a weapons manufacturer. He was providing weapons for the army. He was rich. He was an industrialist. I thought it would be fun to take the kind of character that nobody would like, none of our readers would like, and shove him down their throats and make them like him, and he became popular. Who's Stan talking about it? You know it. Tony Stark, the Iron Man. The Tony Stark character was modeled after real-life rich guy Howard Hughes. Now, some of you people might be too young to know who Howard Hughes is, but you Google him. He was definitely, he was a character. But Stan wanted this character to have a weakness greater than any character he'd ever come up with. So, obviously money wasn't this guy's problem. And yeah, he had a secret identity, but not for long. He didn't really care about that. But this character would have a physical weakness. His heart needed one of Tony's inventions just to stay alive. They did several stories where that device started to falter, and Tony about kicked it. Now, Stan had planned on scripting this comic book himself, but some came up. Once again, he got pulled away, and he turned the main story in Tales of Suspense number 39 over to Lieber, Kirby, and Don Heck. Stan had rolled the dice. Came up 7s. Good job, Stan. Let's jump ahead a few months to mid-1963.
All right.
A quiet guy who we mentioned a few times on back issues, a guy named Steve Ditko, brought a 5-page story to Stan. Years later, in an interview, Ditko said, "On my own, I brought into Lee a 5-page pencil story with a page panel script of my idea of a new, different kind of character for variety in Marvel Comics. My character wound up being named Dr. Strange because he would appear in Strange Tales."
Okay.
Before it was published, Stan said in a letter to Jerry Bales. Jerry Bales was known as the father of comic book fandom. He wrote a lot of fan publications, and he was that guy you always saw in the newsletters in the back of the comics. And him and Stan had struck up some sort of relationship, and they communicated back and forth quite a bit. But in a letter to Jerry, Stan said, "Well, we have a new character in the works for Strange Tales, just a 5-page filler named Dr. Strange. Steve Ditko is going to draw him. It has sort of a black magic theme. The first story is nothing great, but perhaps we can make something of it. 'Twas Steve's idea, and I figured we'd give it a chance. Although, again, we had to rush the first one too much. Little sidelight, originally decided to call him Mr. Strange, but thought the Mr. was a bit too similar to Mr. Fantastic. Now, Strange Tales have been featuring solo stories of the Fantastic Four's Human Torch since issue 101. 9 issues later, in number 110, Dr. Strange was featured in the second story. Although, if you look, there's not a mention of him on the cover. In fact, it wasn't until 7 issues later that he gets any mention at all, and it wasn't until the issue after that before he gets a little small thumbnail picture of him at the bottom of the cover.
Another case of just not knowing what they had until several issues later.
Right.
Did it with Action number 1, and obviously did it here with Doctor Strange.
Now, personally, I thought Ditko did some amazing things with Doctor Strange. More so than he even did with Spider-Man, which was amazing. But his panels of other dimensions reminded me of stuff done by the artist Salvador Dali, just weird stuff. And one of my favorite crossover stories was when Spider-Man goes with Doctor Strange and they go to another dimension in search of the Wand of Watumba. I don't remember the name of the wand, but it was this wand that had 2 different round faces on the end of the wand. All those drawings where Spider-Man's shooting his webs and Doctor Strange is casting spells. I mean, Ditko just loved to draw hands like that. All right, so that became a pretty solid seller. Now, I said that Stan was being successful, was on a roll, but by now in 1963, everything Stan touches has turned to gold, and Stan knows it. So, what the heck? He takes a team idea for a new comic back to publisher Martin Goodman. Goodman immediately shoots down the title. Hey, no. The mutants won't work. Nobody knows what a mutant is. Stan defends his original choice of the title. I couldn't have everybody bitten by a radioactive spider or exposed to a gamma ray explosion. So I took the cowardly way out. I said to myself, why don't I just say they're mutants? They were born that way. And using the proven Marvel method, Stan handed off the basic idea to Kirby, and Kirby said in an interview, the X-Men. I did the natural thing here. What would you do with mutants who were just plain boys and girls and certainly not dangerous? You school them. You develop their skills. So I gave them a teacher, Professor X. Of course, it was a natural thing to do. Instead of disorienting or alienating people who were different from us, I made the X-Men part of the human race, which they were. Possibly radiation, if it is beneficial, may create mutants that will save us instead of doing us harm. I felt that if we train the mutants our own way, they'll help us. And not only help us, but achieve a measure of growth in their own sense. And so we could all live together. Thank you, Jack. Now, most fans think that the X-Men name came from Professor X. Well, I did too. But in the first issue of X-Men Comics, Professor X says that they were named X-Men because they have an extra power. Who knew? All right. Same month that Stan and Jack brought out the X-Men, they also rolled out the Avengers. Now, it's believed they reworked the All-Winter Squad from a Golden Age comic, All Winners Comics number 19. They loaded up a team with Thor, Iron Man, Hulk, Ant-Man, and the Wasp. But Hulk wouldn't play nice with Iron Man, so by issue 3, he took a walk. Now, that could have been to make room for my guy, none other than Captain America. Now, this is Steve Rogers, not Jeffrey Mace or whatever the guy from the Atomic Age was. This is the guy from the Golden Age. Steve Rogers, Captain America. Welcome back, Cap. A month or so after the return of Captain America, we get a blind superhero. Stan could do no wrong. He teamed up with artist Bill Everett to turn Matt Murdock into Daredevil, the man without fear. Now, I didn't like the black and yellow costume. So when issue number 7 came around, Wally Wood, who was now the artist on this title, changed it to the iconic red costume. Thank you, Wally. You're a good man. Yep, the last half of the Silver Age was mostly about Marvel. But let's throw DC a bone or two and let's talk about Batman.
All right.
Specifically, Batman number 327. You notice the number 327, Detective 27. This was the 25th anniversary of Detective Comics. DC did what I've always thought was a bad move. They changed Batman's chest logo. They added a bright yellow circle around the bat symbol. Why does a guy who should mostly be staying in shadows want to have a bright yellow circle to highlight his chest? Now, years later, they came up with an explanation. Batman had put a bulletproof circle of metal under the bat symbol, and he wanted to make sure any snipers out there would target that spot. I still think it's stupid, and I'm glad they dropped it. All right, but on a more positive note, in mid-1964, DC introduced us to a new team in Brave and the Bold number 54. This was a team-up with Kid Flash, Aqualad, and Robin. Then they came together again in Brave and the Bold number 60, and those three sidekicks teamed up with Donna Troy or Wonder Girl, which was Wonder Woman's kid sister. And they then started calling themselves the Teen Titans. Team shows up again in late 1965 in Showcase number 59, and they finally got their own title in early 1966. Well, I guess I've rambled long enough. But to wrap it up, DC owned the first half of the Silver Age and brought superheroes back into our culture. For that, thank you. Marvel finished it off and made me a fan forever. Take it.
Well, that about wraps up the Silver Age. But before we do, I still have a special Silver Age edition of Stump the Old Man. So
it's special because it's Silver Age.
Yes.
Don't be throwing no curves at me.
All right, so let's head back upstairs to the garage and join Thor. All right, comic lovers, it's time for Stump the Old Man and back out here in the garage with Thor. And just like last week, I have an all Silver Age edition of Stump the Old Man. So best 2 out of 3 here. All right, you ready, Thor? You ready? Yeah, you ready for some more treats?
As long as I keep doing this, he's
yeah.
ready.
All right, so number 1, who was the first member invited to join the new Avengers after all but Captain America quit in Avengers number 6?
See, I had Captain America.
I'm sorry, Avengers number 16.
I was going to say, I had Captain America. So the guy after Captain America, I'm going to say Clint, Hawkeye.
That is correct. Hawkeye and other members of this version of the Avengers included the Scarlet Witch and her brother Quicksilver.
I'm telling you, the weakest team, no Thor, no Iron Man, those were my favorite stories. That's why I knew the answer to that question.
All right, on to question number 2. What superhero hired Nelson and Murdoch in Daredevil number 2?
No, it's not a Thor question. It's not an animal question.
Oh.
You couldn't come up with one, could you?
Oh, I've become so used to not having to do Thor questions, I forgot. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm sorry.
Well, it's a good thing because
Something for
it
next
just so
week.
happens I know the answer to that.
Ah, okay.
The Fantastic Four was having some problems with the Baxter building, the lease on it. I think the landlord was getting scared, as he should be. You got the Fantastic Four living in your penthouse, and you know stuff's going to blow up sooner or later. But they needed some legal advice, so Ben Grimm, the ever-loving Thing, the blue-eyed ever-loving Thing, went and talked to Matt about what they should do.
That is correct, and you pretty much did my whole explanation, so don't need to go any further than that.
I like it.
All right, so you already got 2, so this last one is just for funsies.
That's the way it should be.
Yep. All right, so number 3. Whose battle with the Human Torch in Strange Tales number 110 was deemed too titanic that it wasn't even worth mentioning that some guy named Dr. Strange was also being introduced in this issue?
Well, see, that's back when they alternated covers. You never knew who was going to be on the cover. It was either going to be, they were running the Thing and the Torch stories, not necessarily the Fantastic Four, but sometimes the other members of the team showed up. But at first I was just going to say it was Ben and Johnny because they had some classic battles in some of those issues. But since you said it was a big Titanic deal, I'm going to say it was the Frightful Four.
It was actually the Wizard and Paste Pot Pete.
Okay, that's the Trapster, and that's half of the Fantastic Four.
You mean the
Frightful Four.
Frightful Four? Well, that's what it says on the answer. There wasn't the total Frightful Four.
I don't care. That wasn't for the win anyway.
Very little is learned about Doctor Strange in this issue, as his origin story isn't told until Strange Tales number 115. It's also worth noting Wong isn't mentioned by name until Strange Tales number 147.
Huh.
So,
Would not have known that. I'm glad you didn't ask me anything about that.
so there is your bit of Marvel Silver Age trivia for this week. Was it good, Thor? Was it good?
Was it? I think it was.
All right, comic lovers, that about does it for this episode, and we're so sad. We are so sad because Thor, because Thor is about done here for today, aren't you, boy? Aren't you, boy? Yes.
And I still got all 10.
Like what? Did you want something? What are you looking at? Did you want something? Did you want this? Did you want this? All right, so next week we are going to be covering the Bronze Age in our History of Comics series. Isn't that right? Yes, it is. And it's going to be the time from, I believe, 1970 to 1984. And what some regard as the last great age. It's okay. It's okay, boy. We're almost done. We're almost done here. All right.
So tell me, Thor, while you've been visiting Asgard, did you find yourself a female type character?
Have you taken a lover, Thor? No, don't want to. Like he wants to tell me, but not on the camera, right?
He's a gentleman. No kiss and tell.
Right. All right. So we're gonna be joining. Hopefully Thor's gonna be back. Hopefully Thor is back to stay. Right, boy?
That was a reminder.
Yep.
For treats.
All right. So we will see you guys next week. Excelsior.
True believers, kind of cold out there. Don't leave your pets out unless you absolutely have to. If it's any colder, I don't care if you have to or not. You bring them in.
Yeah.